Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search With Candour. I am your host, Jack Chambers-Ward, and I'm joined this week by Amanda King. Amanda is somebody who I've been trying to have on the show for a very long time, and because of not using Twitter and all other bits and pieces, it has delayed us quite a lot, by about a year and a half or 2 years, I think something like that. But thankfully, Amanda caught me in Brighton early this year and was like, hey, we need to do a podcast together. Remember we talked about that? And I was like, oh yeah, we did. And now we're here, finally. Finally, in November of 2024, we're doing a podcast all about content hierarchy and content consolidation. Why they're important things to do, how to get them right, some common mistakes to avoid, and everything in between. If you're thinking about doing a big content audit, or you need to revamp your content on your site or for one of your clients, this is the podcast episode for you. It's going to talk all about how to get content hierarchy correct for you, for your users, for Google and everything else, and content consolidation, and why it's probably something you should be doing in 2024 and throughout 2025 as well. Amanda is brilliant and hilarious, and I think you'll have a fantastic time enjoying this conversation with me and Amanda. But let's have a word from our sponsors first, shall we? A huge thank you to SE Ranking for sponsoring this week's episode of Search With Candour. SE Ranking is the company behind the powerful and intuitive SEO platform trusted by millions of agencies, businesses, and SEO professionals since 2013. With a robust toolkit, SE Ranking empowers SEO professionals around the world to excel at executing their strategies. Key features include the Rank Tracker, which provides accurate and up-to-date keyword rankings, as well as the competitive and keyword research tools that offer deep insights into market trends and competitor strategies. The platform's AI-powered SEO insights leverage advanced machine learning to deliver actionable recommendations, streamlining the process and letting you outrank your competition. The Backlink Checker and Monitoring tool enables you to analyze backlink profiles and monitor their status, ensuring you've got a very healthy link building strategy. SE Ranking have launched their AI Overviews tracking feature. It's a brand new tool that allows you to track AI search engine snippets that will help you see how you stack up against your competitors in Google's AI enhanced search features. The tool supports you in identifying your rivals in the snippets, analyzing their content, and detecting new opportunities for strategic decisions. Click the link in the video description down below or in the show notes if you're listening to this episode. And a huge thank you to SE Ranking for sponsoring us here at Search With Candour. Optimizer is the modern PPC management software that is built by PPC people for PPC people. Optimizer contains everything you need to create, optimize, and automate high-performing paid campaigns across multiple platforms. As I just mentioned, we're going across platforms, and I think this is one of the best time-saving options and features when it comes to Optimizer. If you are advertising across multiple platforms, including Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook, then you need to be using these cross-platform tools. You can create reports, you can create shareable dashboards, you can share budgets and alerts across all of these platforms. If you are individually managing each of these things, you could save yourself a lot of time by using Optimizer's cross-platform tools. For monitoring, the alerts let you know when budgets have been exhausted or KPIs have been reached or missed. And when it comes to the rule engine, this allows you to set up custom rules to automate so many time-consuming and manual tasks that are part of your paid campaigns. You can easily automate rules. Basically, if you can write your strategy or tactic down, you can automate it. It's that simple. This can be especially helpful in things like e-commerce when it comes to stopping overspending of a particular ad. This is something I know from personal experience. I have had an ad that has overspent, and if I had used Optimizer, that would have saved my budget and saved my campaign in that instance, and I wish I'd used Optimizer at the time. You can also adjust bids and choose which products or ads are showing based on things like the weather and pretty much anything else you can put into a spreadsheet. It is fully customizable and automated, so you can choose when ads start and which products are showing depending on the time of year, depending on the weather, and so many other factors. It's all automated and makes the process so much easier. To sum it up, Optimizer is the award-winning all-in-one PPC toolkit that makes managing paid search easier, faster, and less prone to error. It puts you back in the control of your campaigns by allowing you to create and deploy your own automations across multiple ad platforms. You can start your 14-day free trial by going to optimizer.com. That's optmyzr.com. You can also click the link in the show notes. And if you want to see Optimizer in action, you can book a personalized demo with one of Optimizer's experts by clicking the link in the show notes as well. So you can get a 14-day trial or book a demo at no cost to you. Like I said, go and click the link in the show notes or the video description down below. And a huge thank you to Optimizer for sponsoring Search with Candour. My guest for this week has worked in SEO for nearly 15 years. They are the principal consultant for Flock, an agency based in Sydney, Australia. We'll be talking about that in a moment, don't you worry. They have written for publications including Search Engine Land, Screaming Frog, Sitebob, and many others. They've spoken at conferences around the world, including most recently Ahrefs Evolve, Brighton SEO, the Sydney SEO Conference, and the Search Marketing Summit as well. They're also the host of the Engage on Enterprise SEO podcast, including some of my favorite people in SEO as guests. So people like Martin Splitt, people like Tom Critchlow, Daniel K. Chung, Arij Abawali, and Jamie Indigo, all who have been on this show before and have done fantastic episodes on that podcast. Perhaps most importantly, she's the creator of 4letterfancies.com, your new favorite profanity-based apparel and stationery supplier. Welcome to the show, Amanda King.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to be on here after a long back and forth of ships passing in the night. We finally got to meet at Brighton, and
yes.
And we're finally able to kind of sit down and be like, oh, yes, we did talk about doing this.
Yeah, so to give the viewers and listeners a bit of context, we spoke on Twitter, and I'd followed you for a while, and I know we'd interacted a couple of times, and like I said, I'd seen your podcast and seen some articles you'd written and things like that, and we DM'd a couple of times, and I basically just kind of stopped using Twitter without telling anyone I stopped using Twitter, because you know, the whole thing, the politics and the Elon Musk of it all and all that kind of thing. And then 2 years later, you were like, hey, didn't I DM you and you completely ghosted me on Twitter that one time? I was like, oh no, yeah, you did. I'm so sorry. Yeah, oh my God. So here we are, like 2 years later, finally doing a podcast together.
Here we are. And I mean, what I wanted to talk about then is still really relevant now. And it's
perfect.
It's one of those things that I'm also kind of working on a course in the background. Hopefully it'll be up in January. But it's one of the things I think people need to be reminded of in SEO, particularly around now, because there are so many shiny things that getting the foundationals right is really important, and content and the structure around content and how much content we have is actually is a really important part of that as well.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to be talking about content hierarchy and content consolidation as well, because like you said, I think we're totally guilty of this as an industry and as individuals as well. I know we're always talking about AI tools and everybody's using ChatGPT and Gemini and Copilot and Search GPT or whatever it's called now, all this kind of stuff to do all this cool fancy things. But a lot of the foundations of what makes good content and what makes discoverable, crawlable, and well-written, well-structured content, I think gets kind of lost a lot of the time when you're letting a robot write your headers for you and structure your content. That doesn't actually necessarily work best for humans and users, right? So I guess to kick us off and give us a little intro, for the listeners of yours who don't know that phrase of content hierarchy, how would you define it, Amanda, and how do we want to kind of like start with this whole big process?
So, I mean, it's two-sided, right? Because there's the visual hierarchy in terms of the way that the design actually looks, and then there's the way that it's coded in the background. And in an ideal world, those things would line up, right? So we would have the biggest heading being the H1 or the H2 on the page, and then following down from there. Sometimes that doesn't always happen. We ideally want it to. And then there's the smaller things like how bulleted lists are formatted, how links are formatted in the code level, and just bringing it back to AI for a hot second, and then we can run away from it. But that is one thing that I think will become actually a lot more important in the future, is because this is one thing, again, that I like to remind people of. Google's native language isn't English, it's code.
Yeah.
And we want to, even if Google is like, oh no, it doesn't matter, we can understand it, anything that we can do to make things more explicit to Google in an age where we're fighting not even just to be ranked, but to be crawled and indexed, that giving Google all of the cues semantically as much as we can, and in that structured data as much as we can, because structured data isn't just schema, it is actually the code as well. So giving as many kind of cues as we can is super important, and I think will become a lot more important in maybe the next 2-3 years.
Yeah, 100%. I think that was something I touched on when I spoke to Dave Ajita. We were talking about schema, funnily enough, and I think Dave put it so brilliantly that it is, when you use structured data, you're giving Google your content on a silver platter. You're not letting them crawl it and render it and parse it and try and determine the context and blah, 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 and leaving a lot up to chance and the processes that, like you said, we now fight to even get crawled and indexed these days, let alone ranking, let alone getting clicks, let alone making money from those clicks. There's a whole step process to that, right? The way we can structure it to make our important bits more easily discoverable, both for users and for crawlers as well, I think is a huge part of what is going to differentiate a lot of seemingly similar pieces of content. Because again, even the context that Dave put it in that I hadn't even really thought about, like the easier you can make it for Google to crawl your content, the cheaper it's going to be for them. And at the end of the day, it's all about money. And as much as we complain about that on the show, it's fundamentally true. And you're totally right. Like the way you structure your page, your site, the way you introduce, like you said, the big headers and all that kind of stuff, and make sure it is a clearly understandable process, is going to help Google at the end of the day, which means they're probably going to reward you back, right?
Yeah. And like, this is probably a bit of a controversial thing to say a little bit. If we're talking about e-commerce websites, I actually kind of hate Shopify.
Oh, here we go.
Because
we're not sponsored by Shopify, don't worry.
Because it has a relatively flat structure. Like, it's super hard to get sub collections. You can't really line up your products correctly unless you think about it from the start, and you choose the nested structure, and you disallow, or you manage the like / product structure. Like, it gets super obtuse for people, and there are like, I feel like that's gonna let so many businesses down in the future, particularly as they grow and they get more nuanced in the things that they're offering. Or say you want to walk away from the blog, because that's a whole nother conversation, right? About content structure and content hierarchy. The blog is intrinsically time-based, even if in your head it's not, even if you're not being like, oh, I'm not, like, it's not in the date archive folders, it's not time-based. It still is, because of the pagination there, right? So if you wanted to move away from the blog structure and include product specific content in your product folder, like, you can't do that in a platform like Shopify. I don't know if there would be any CMSs other than WordPress that you'd actually really be able to do that in. But like, it's those kinds of things that are maybe like a 2% or a 5% solution now that'll start becoming more important, personally, the way that I'm seeing things.
Yeah, definitely. That was literally a conversation I was having with a client a couple of weeks ago at the start of the month, where we were talking about introducing the relevant informational content on product pages and category pages. So having an idea of the kind of FAQ stuff. And obviously we've been producing a lot of informational content since I joined Candour with this client for like 3 years now. So they've got a pretty healthy structure of blogs, and it's talking about pretty like YM, YL subjects, lots of like medical stuff and stuff like that. They've really kind of proven themselves and established themselves. And we were having this discussion of how can we then translate that to the product side of things. And you're totally right. Like being able to add extra pieces of information where that search intent kind of crosses over between the informational and the transactional, where people are looking for information about specific products. It can make sense to have that on the product page itself rather than, oh, I want to learn about product X and I now need to go and read a whole blog post that gives me all the information about product X and why it's important and all that kind of stuff. But then there isn't a add to cart button. There isn't that conversion point. Having that content there with that stuff, I think, is a really, really clever way of doing it. I think it's something we're going to find a lot more people doing. But I also think there's a negative side to it as well, because people can go crazy and then turn what used to be a product page or a category page into essentially a blog post. And I've seen this many times doing competitor research for this client, where I will scroll to the bottom of a product listing page and it's just an entire blog post about stuff. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, this feels weird.
Yeah.
And like you said, where you put that content, is it above the fold, is it above those products, is it below, should there be a read more button, all this kind of stuff I think matters so much more than what we give it time and credit for, right?
Yeah. And I mean, the way that I think about it and the way that I do, so I worked at Optus, which is one of the big telcos in Australia. So I think like Vodafone. I worked there for 3 years, and one of the things that I fought for wasn't necessarily that kind of consideration set content on the product page, but having that consideration set content in the product page folder structure. So it was like nested underneath it. We had essentially like a product level blog almost, but it was just a content repository that we linked to from the product pages. And I want to say essentially the view through with customers who saw that content and then went on to purchase was 23% higher organically than it was. So it's also one of those things where if you can do a proof of concept, it can actually potentially really be a benefit to the conversion as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is something where we see,
because Google understands that relationship more, because it is
exactly
in the hierarchy where it is like, here is product information in the product folder. And like it, again, we're being a bit more explicit with the relationship levels there.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's literally a sense of getting that internal linking structure correct as well, and understanding not only how, like you said, the relationship that Google will understand, like, okay, I can now cluster these things together and understand the relationship between these pages, but also how users navigate around it as well. And this is kind of a whole UX discussion, but I think that is hugely relevant here as well, because again, I feel like over the last few years we've moved in a positive direction where a lot of UX conversations are kind of blending with a lot of SEO stuff, and it's pretty much been a theme for this year on the podcast, pretty much like, don't just silo SEO into its own little thing. It is so related to CRO, to UX, to all the other aspects that are happening on the site. Don't just worry about your little bit and kind of cut your nose off to spite your face to ruin the UX of the process. Like I said, creating all that top content and then you can't find the products on a product page is not a good user experience. Think about that. Consider how it's all linked together. And you mentioned there like a brilliant example of building those little clusters within a particular section of the site, whether that is the product side of things, and having those pieces relate to those products. You can talk about all of the different things in category A and you talk about all the different products there and how they differ, do comparisons, do pros, cons, all this kind of stuff to help Google better understand how your products relate to each other as well.
Yeah, and I think we're coming to a bit, or if we haven't already, come to a point, because Google's mission has always been to understand these things, these intangible kind of things like brand sentiment and how people actually feel about, and it's the intent behind the intent. And but Google's technology is now at a point where they can actually deliver on those things. So all of the things that we've been saying about user experience and, like the user experience matters, like a good Google user experience in terms of like webmaster guidelines and things, like all of that, we know Google can measure those things, like, and be able to measure those things at scale. And so we have to be able to actually be involved in those conversations. And it, like, I think that's probably the biggest thing for me, is that all of these things that for years people have been like, oh, that, that's not really that important. Let's focus on content and links, is now shifting, because Google can actually have the technology that can do all of those things, where before it was kind of a nice to have, and be like, this is a stretch goal for us. We want to be able to understand these things. Now they're like, no, we understand these things.
I think that's necessarily a compliment to Google and a compliment to us in the industry, how much we've matured, hopefully. Like you said, fingers crossed, we're moving in the right direction for the most part, where, like you said there's an interesting relationship that Google is constantly learning new things and developing, and obviously talking about things like Bert and Mum and how they're making these connections and building these systems and machine learning systems to connect everything together and to better understand how we produce content on the web, both transactional, informational, whatever it is. I think that is definitely something we're going to see grow in importance. And I think that's why something like the hierarchy of your content, whether that's in the site itself or on the page individually, where that can be that difference maker. Like you said, Google kind of knows what they're doing with loads of stuff. Granted, we talk plenty of shit about AI overviews and all the mistakes there and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, for the last 25 plus years, Google has gotten pretty damn good at understanding how the web works, how content works, how pages are linked to each other and relate to each other and all that kind of stuff. And when it comes to this kind of pushing through to the next level and differentiating yourself and that kind of evolution of the way we produce content and the way we build our content, it's going to be these little things that aren't, like you said, necessarily in those guidelines that are the next way to push us forward and separate yourself and differentiate yourself from your customers and your competitors.
Yeah. And so there's another thing that I come back to with content and the way we structure it, is also just the type of copywriting that we use and the style, because at the end, Google is still a machine. It still has to use machine processing to understand the content of a page. And there was an article, I think Justin Briggs wrote it, I want to say back in 2013, explaining natural language processing. And it's still something that I will refer people back to if it's a new concept, because what it does is, one of the things he talks about is the concept of context hops or like context jumps. Basically, if you have a question that you're answering, either implicit or explicit, you want to answer that question as cleanly and immediately as possible first, and then go on and expand or extrapolate. So that's something from kind of a semantic and content hierarchy perspective we want to think of as well. It makes it potentially, for some copywriters, a bit more difficult to embed like brand tone and brand voice, but like give the customer the answer to the question that they're asking.
It seems obvious, right? It seems so obvious, but you're totally right that so many sites and so many people who are creating content for websites fall on that kind of first hurdle. And obviously this is something I jokingly mentioned AI overviews just now, but that is a relevant discussion when it comes to this kind of thing. It's kind of unavoidable at this point. And this was also a discussion that was had 10 years ago when featured snippets became a thing. And suddenly everybody's worried about the very specific part of, you need to have a question and then an answer perfectly laid out with your heading as the question, and then the answer comes straight away after it and all that kind of stuff. And I know it's something Mark and I talk about a lot on the podcast when we do our monthly recap episodes. It's like, Google is pretty clever with this kind of stuff. And as we were just saying, they've been doing this stuff for 25 years. They can kind of work out what is the answer to that question pretty easily without you literally labeling it. However, structured data, schema, all that kind of stuff does nudge them in the right direction. So there's a kind of a balancing act there, I feel like, between just doing the super clean cut question, answer, and like you said, balancing things like brand and tone of voice and personality. It seems really cliche and cheesy, but something I've been talking about a lot this year, and we'll be talking about again next year, is that authenticity of content as well, because I feel like it's a weird kind of tangent to go on, but like the TikTokification of so much content we're seeing now, especially with what Gen Z and Gen Alpha have been doing, where I'm now in my mid-30s and feeling very old on the internet and thinking, oh, I really like well-produced, clean-cut, like, you know, nice camera shots, nice audio, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. I'm a nerd when it comes to this. I've set up this studio in Candour for a reason for this podcast, if you're watching on YouTube. And people don't want that anymore. They kind of just want raw, real people just chatting into a camera and being open and honest and authentic. And I think a lot of brands do that badly, personally, and try to jump on that trend a little bit too much rather than actually being real and authentic and honest about their products. You mentioned it earlier, like being honest about what your product does and doesn't do and stuff like that, because I think so many brands are hesitant to say anything negative about themselves. Oh, we can't possibly suggest that product doesn't do absolutely everything and it isn't the best product X in the world. Like, I kind of don't trust you then. Like, you should probably be honest about, yeah, product X is great for, you know, solution Y, but it doesn't do solution Z very well. We have another thing for that. Try this instead. I think that honest kind of authentic conversation, and like you said, the natural language processing and the way we search is changing with the more conversational stuff with Search GPT and AI overviews and Gemini and Copilot and all this kind of stuff that's happening with LLMs. The language of search is changing, and I feel like our content and the way we structure it kind of needs to reflect that, right?
Yeah, and that's also where a lot of the content consolidation conversations come in, right? Because I mean, you've been in this industry long enough. I'm sure, you know, 7 years ago you were having conversations about keyword specific content pages and having them for different variations of almost exactly the same word. So, best 2 carat diamonds or prettiest 2 carat diamonds, like everything that Google has done with the knowledge graph and entities kind of makes all that redundant. So you don't need to have a single page for all of those things anymore. The example that I like to give, because I'm a travel nerd, right? If I was positioning myself as a travel blogger and was talking about Paris, it's not how many times do I say Paris on the page, right? It's, do I talk about the Louvre? Do I talk about almond croissants? Do I talk about Luxembourg Gardens and the left bank? Do I talk about the shopping or the fashion? Like, there is much more of a sense of the spider web of context around a topic. It's not those kind of immediate, like, next words. It's not the large language model side of things. It is that kind of Wikipedia. And oftentimes the biggest stumbling block there is internal stakeholders who started and stopped learning SEO 8 years ago.
Or never started.
Or never started, and just are stuck and need to be brought on the journey.
I legit saw, I can't remember if it was an excerpt from a talk or a podcast or whatever it was, that was talking about keyword density in 2024. This was like a week ago at the time of recording. I'm like, hold on a minute. Wasn't that debunked like 15 years ago? How are we still talking about keyword density? Like you said, literally, how many times can you say Paris on your travel blog to then rank for the word Paris? You're not going to rank for the word Paris. That'd be ridiculous. That's not possible. But funny, I'm glad you mentioned travel blog stuff, because that was something that I talked with Shonda Nicole about, where Shonda had moved from a like recipe blog and publishing cookbooks and all that kind of stuff. But then she moved to Las Vegas and talked about how amazing Las Vegas is and turn that into our own, like, I'm a Las Vegas ambassador travel blog type thing, and talk about recommendations of things to do in Las Vegas. And exactly as you were saying there, you've got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And Shonda used a perfect example of, like, gigs in Las Vegas. You get the residencies there, right? Or you talking about the Louvre, the art in Paris and things like that. Show yourself in a photo with the thing to prove that you have been to the thing and done the thing. It's all well and good saying, yeah, I've been to the Louvre and I love some art, me. Brilliant. Yeah, big fan of art. Like, what the...
Mona Lisa.
Yeah, 5 out of 5, Mona Lisa. Like, who cares? Like, that's the blandest, most uninteresting conversation you can possibly have. But if you pick something specific and say, actually, in the West Gallery, there's this specific artist who I'd always found interesting, but I'd finally got to see their work in person and it blew me away, and here's why it resonated with me, and all this kind of stuff. Again, it's that authenticity, it's that genuine reaction, it's that real important information that separates you from your competitors. And I sure use the example of, like, I went to see Mariah Carey and I did a discussion of residencies in Las Vegas. Here's a photo of me at the Mariah Carey concert, rather than just saying, yeah, saw the gig, it was great, she's my favorite, 5 out of 5. Like, that doesn't tell me anything. Like, I think we've gotten into a bad habit with a lot of reviews. I know this is my turn to nerd out on, like, the video game side of things as well, where so many people just skip to the numbers. Like, is it an 8 out of 10? Is it a 9 out of 10? Is it a whatever? Nobody gets the nuance of the actual review. And as somebody who used to work in, pop culture journalism and stuff, that drove me and my co-workers absolutely crazy. Like, I have written 3,000 words about the pros, the cons, the good bits, the bad bits of this film, of this book, of this video game, whatever it is. And then all the comments are like, why'd you only give it a 7? Why is it an 8? Oh, I don't play anything. I don't read anything that's anything below an 8, because what's the point? But that's where the nuance, that's where the humanity is. That's where we relate to each other. And for me, that's where a lot of content resonates. Again, maybe I'm old-fashioned. Maybe I'm trying to be cool and down with the kids and failing miserably. But
and honestly, it's that kind of boilerplate content as well that Google, not that I'm calling the nuanced 3,000 word video game reviews, the boilerplate content, but the very kind of static pieces of information that Google has been kind of trying to weed out of people getting in the habit of writing those very kind of broad top level articles, where it's like, what are the public holidays in the UK for 2020? Like, and every accountant is going to have a page being like, here are the public holidays. And it's just like, no, like, it's the UK Gov website. Like, that's all that you need. And again, it comes back to money, because when there are 260,000 new web pages published a day, like, or something ridiculous like that, like, Google has to pick and choose. And if there is one authority that they know is the authority for this factual piece of information that is not going to change much, then why show anyone else?
100%.
So
yeah,
as we've been kind of saying, it is that personality and that lived experience that is going to be the differentiator, or that lived expertise. So it is one of those unfortunate things, I think, when talking about how to combat and still build visibility without all of these kind of keyword level articles that we've been writing for the last 7 years and consolidating them into something larger. You, like, as a practitioner or as the subject matter expert for that company, you are kind of going to have to come out from behind the screen a bit. Like, you're going to have to show your face, because millennials, I don't think, are as jaded in some ways as Gen Z, but there is still very much the stranger danger, internet safety. Like, if I don't know who you are, why should I trust what you're saying?
Yeah, I think it's a this is a whole broader, wider political discussion. We're opening up a can of worms now, but there was also, yeah, I know, right? It's like after recent news, we're not going to dig into because we don't have all day. We would be here very, very late if we did that.
Yes.
But I think the recent reaction, again, over the last decade or so, of people not believing experts and the whole kind of like anti-science movement and that whole thing, as a person who has a physics degree, I find very, very irritating. But I think that is totally right, where you find the people you resonate with. I have totally done this, and I've talked about this on the show before. My experience as a comic book reviewer and comic writer back in the day, my somewhat previous career, if you can call it that, of a couple of years, where I learned not to just follow the next Batman or the next Spider-Man or whatever it is. I learned to, I resonate with this particular writer or this particular artist. I follow people in SEO because their values resonate with me. I understand, and I think they're super smart, they're super clever. You're one of those people, Amanda. Lots of people I've had on this show before, I've listened to their podcast, and people are always fascinated when I say, oh yeah, I've listened to your podcast. Like, I've had people in real life react to be like, oh, hello, you know who I am? I'm like, yeah. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I read a lot of content. I am a consumer of content even more than I'm a creator of content. And I know this sounds, maybe listeners and viewers, very like waffly and airy-fairy and stuff like that, but I think this is still hugely relevant to that consolidation discussion. This is still part of this wider content creation stuff that we're talking about in 2024 and 2025, right?
Because it's a very weird balance. You have to consolidate the historical crap that was all the same thing, just worded slightly differently, and then almost fragment yourself into different media spaces, right? Whether that's photos or YouTube or a podcast, something else to essentially validate your expertise and be like, no, I am not an AI bot here behind this screen. Like, I am an individual and these are my qualifications. This is what I've been doing. This is my experience. This is what my day was like today. Like, and that side of things, because, and it honestly, it comes back to the content structuring as well, because one of the key things is that Google cannot manifest itself and experience these things on its own until we get to the singularity. And by that point, it probably won't matter. But like, lived experience is not something that Google can replicate. They can only curate it. So we can't fight against Google. So we have to kind of join Google in this fragmentation of the content space. It's not all going to be 300 to 500 word blog articles focusing on X, Y, and Z keywords. Like, it is more nuanced than that now in terms of both speaking to people in a way that they will engage with and engaging with search engines in a way that they will crawl and index and rank.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the consolidation of content, I think, is something a lot of people, like you said, who have been following best practices. Maybe you're a client listening to this who works with an agency or works with a consultant or whatever it is, or your in-house team has been producing, for want of a better phrase, to steal a phrase from Google, good, helpful content for the last decade or whatever. But like you said, things are moving, things are changing. The way Google understands the way we search and the way it understands the relationship between the brand, the site, and the content it produces has changed. And as much as a lot of the fundamentals and the kind of best practices are still the same as they were 20 years ago, there is a lot of stuff I think a lot of people can benefit from. Like you said, the perfect example of best thing versus prettiest thing versus best selling thing versus top versus favorite versus all these little nuanced little variations and synonyms we can use, where previously we would be thinking about targeting specific keywords page by page by page. Now, exactly as you were saying, we need to think about the intent and the intent behind the intent of that page and how the searcher and how the user is going to find that page. Because if I'm looking for the best wedding rings or whatever, then I probably want to think about the prettiest or the biggest or the most expensive or the least expensive. There are a lot of factors to every product, to every service, that I probably need to consider. So having a way of, I mean, you used the Wikipedia article example earlier, right? I've seen some brilliant examples of sites building like knowledge hubs, and essentially is its own little wiki within the site that gives you everything you could possibly need to know about their products, their services, how they work, how they don't work, how they relate, even, dare I say it, and sorry to scare you clients who are listening, linking to competitors sometimes too. External links to competitors, shock horror. Like, being able to cover everything and being able to prove that you know what you're talking about, I think is going to have to be a big difference maker. And that is going to be the thing that is going to separate you from a lot of your competitors, to be bold, to do that kind of stuff. And like you said, if you've got the time and the investment to go through your old archive of blog posts and be like, okay, how do these relate to other? Think about literally clustering them and understanding, and go through like a full content audit process and kind of go through that process of understanding how all these pages relate to each other. Is there a lot of crossover? Do SERP comparisons, all this kind of stuff to understand how your content relates to each other and contributes to the whole. I think that's kind of where we need to be going, rather than just deleting content for its sake. I'm sure you've heard Amanda, like, I think, to bring up speak the devils and he may appear, Neil Patel mentioned mentioned that, like, I deleted 100 blog posts and my traffic went up 15 million%. And I was like, yeah, but that's a massive oversimplification of an actual audit and a consolidation process, right?
Yeah. And I mean, when it comes down to it, right, Google doesn't want to crawl the best, shiniest, prettiest, favoritist articles that are all saying the same thing, because it costs them money every single time that they do it. And the internet is getting exponentially larger. So, and they're also trying to layer on top of everything a very resource heavy AI overview. And so it's all just the consolidating costs. So it's like, if they're probably not going to crawl that content anyway. And I was talking to John Alderson not that long ago, and we were basically saying that every kind of duplicate piece of content, every smallish technical thing, every page that you haven't managed, essentially becomes, in the day and age that we're in with Google at the moment, essentially becomes an existential crisis for the website and for the identity of your brand, because every kind of hanging chad that you leave offers an opportunity for Google to say, no, I'm not coming back to this site.
Yeah, 100%. I know Jono's had some pretty controversial opinions over the years,
Yes.
but I really, really respect Jono and what the lot of insights he's had over the years into this kind of content side of things. And I think he was having a conversation the other day of, stop creating content, stop doing blog posts, stop just making stuff because you need to make stuff. Stop the churn, the monthly retainers that we have as agencies, and the hourly or weekly KPIs you're held to in-house or whatever it is. Actually think about this stuff and think about, as we said, like, when do you think is the right time to go through that process and think about content consolidation? Should it be, as you're onboarding a client, should it be once a year? Should it be every few months? Is there a sweet spot you found from your experience of kind of thinking about how to have that conversation with a client, with the in-house team, whatever it is?
I mean, I do definitely think it is something to raise at the beginning when you're doing your strategic baseline, when you're just like, hey, you've got 4,000 articles that you published in 2012. We should do something about those. Even if it's like to 410 gone them because they haven't gotten traffic in 10 years, but there is an active management that should happen. And I'm always a fan of kind of an annual check-in, whether that's aligned with their financial year or the calendar year, just sometime where it's like, or their quiet period where it's just like, hey, if something comes up and we're like, oh, this whole kind of content hub that we built and created a year ago actually has like 20% duplicate content. Like, can we, because that's something also where intents change and consumer behavior changes and consumer needs and wants and expectations change. So it is something that should be revisited. I mean, that's been my experience. What have you found with your clients when you've had these conversations, if you've had these conversations? Because I know it's a weird conversation to have where you're just like, hey, all that optimized content that you've been creating for the last, decade, maybe not so much anymore.
I wasn't expecting to turn the table on me. I can tell you're a fellow podcast host returning the favor. But yeah, I think it's like you said, it can be a pretty difficult conversation, especially if you don't handle it delicately. To briefly touch on like client communication and all that kind of stuff, I think there's a way where you can say like, oh yeah, I know you were working with the previous agency and they made a bunch of crap. I was like, well, it's brought us a bunch of traffic and a bunch of, revenue or whatever it is. It's been working. But then when you look at it, like we're saying, from a semantic basis, from a holistic view of looking at the whole thing as a contribution to the site, to the contribution to the brand, and as you were saying, to Google and the web as a whole, I think you can have that conversation definitely as part of the onboarding. If you know they've been producing content for a long time and either they've been doing it with little direction or and seen some success, or they come to you and say, hey, we're producing content but it's just not going anywhere, what's going on, help us, SEO agency, you're our only hope, kind of thing. Which we get those kind of inquiries sometimes. You don't necessarily leap straight into the retainer. Sometimes it's we've been doing this thing, it's not working, any advice, can you help us, kind of thing. Yeah. And I think when it comes to the consolidation stuff, we had a huge international client we were working with late last year, and funnily enough, it came down to the politics of the different types of sites. So it was, they had a bunch of international sites and each one of them was in their respective language, but also a lot of those languages cross over. So a lot of South America speaks Spanish, but so does Spain, and so does Central America, and so do a lot of US citizens also speak Spanish. So with hreflangs and personalizing the content and localizing the content, how do you make that stuff work? And I went in with a very bold consolidation thing of like, right, all the German stuff to Germany, all the French stuff to France, all this stuff. And I was like, boil it down. How much difference, and this was from their perspective, when you're producing content in Portuguese, is it for Portuguese people or is it for Brazilian-speaking Portuguese people? Like, how much nuance is there in your content? I know from experience, I used to work in a language school. I know there is a difference in that culture, in that approach, in that language, the way they communicate, despite speaking the same language, in the same way that you being an American living in Australia talking to a British person, that's three different types of English right there.
Yeah. And I mean, I lived in China for a year and I can speak Mandarin, but throw me some Cantonese and I will just give you question marks.
Perfect example. Exactly. Yeah. There's those little nuances. And I was like, how bold can we be? Like, is your stuff just Google Translate Portuguese and hope for the best? Or is it localized to Brazil and that market? And they were like, yeah, kind of a bit of both. I'm like, consolidate it all. Just make slash like Portuguese / Portugal / PR, whatever you want to do, and consolidate it all into specific languages. That didn't work. And I used the Portuguese Brazilian example because a client was like, our Brazilian team is quite like politically powerful in the company, so we can't touch them. I'm like, okay, well, I'm recommending it, but fair enough. Okay, I now know, don't mess with the Brazilian team. That's what I learned. But I think, yeah, there's that element. We do this here at Candour. We have annual reviews of the accounts and stuff like that, where the client lead, so that's the SEO lead or the digital PR lead or both, and the account manager as well, we will sit down and think about what's worked, what hasn't worked. Do we need to do a top up of the technical audit we did during onboarding? Has it been a year? Has it been 2 years? Has it been 3 years? And we've kind of just been ticking along and everything's been fine. But sometimes stuff crops up and you don't notice stuff until you start crawling. Like, again, I think a lot of people get into the bad habit of very closely monitoring stuff and tweaking and checking every single day and every single week. But there's also a balance between that and just leaving it and not checking for 2 years.
Yeah. And it's because I mean, the consolidations that I've done, right, have probably been in the over time, particularly post helpful content update. I've seen, 60 to 80% uplift in organic traffic for those sections of the blog that were consolidated because things are more targeted, right? And they're probably linked better. They've got more internal links to related like they've had a bit more love and care in that process as well.
Yeah, I think that is such a big part of, like we said, making sure your structure works for Google and for the user as well. When that comes to how your knowledge hub, your blog, your wiki, whatever it is on your site works and how it interconnects with the rest of it. Again, linking to products, services, whatever it is, or just being mostly informational and building that structure there as well. There's also cannibalization issues, which I'm sure everyone watching, listening, Amanda, you just dropped your head onto the desk there in frustration. We have all bumped into cannibalization issues, and consolidation can help solve a lot of that stuff, right? I think can be a huge part of that.
Yeah, and it's always one of those things where it is that conversation again and that education where it's like, well, if I have 2 pages, isn't like targeting similar ideas, isn't that going to help me rank better because I'll have 2 pages? It's like, no. Google can't decide which one it wants to rank, so therefore it's just going to rank them both lower, like worse. So no, you don't want 2 things targeting near concepts. Like, no, please don't.
Yeah, there's I can't remember the exact wording Google used, but they talk about SERP diversity, where they don't want to rank the same site. In theory, and this isn't always true, don't hang me for this or anything like that, but in general, Google tries to present 10 different sites in the 10 blue links you would typically see on what used to be page 1 pre-AI overviews. And the same is mostly true for AI overviews, although I've seen it to a lesser extent from the little bit of research I've done, where the 4 to 5 links in AI overviews tend to be from multiple sources. Yeah. Unless it is a super, super specific query that somebody has absolutely nailed, or it's Reddit and we've got trouble from Google, then you tend to see multiple sources. And you're totally right. When you can have that element of covering multiple topics essentially in one page, in one place, in one source on the same site, you can then have that ability to rank for different things rather than, like you said, battling for, page X and page Y on site B are essentially fighting each other. And cannibalization, I think we throw that term around, literally means eating each other. Like, think about the origin of that word and why we use that term for that phrase. Like, yeah, your pages are eating each other, and neither is going to grow or achieve its best or achieve success or whatever if it's being eaten by the other one. And when you can pluck something out and make it your champion, your key part, your main thing that you want to tell people about, you want to shout from the rooftops, that can really be where the content shines. You gave a perfect example there, Amanda, of like suddenly you see 50, 60, 70, 80% uplift because you're actually tidying everything up and cleaning everything up and actually ranking for what you should be ranking for in the first place rather than competing with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of all of the content stuff goes hand in hand, but structure and this whole concept of consolidation really kind of go hand in hand as well. You feel like they would seem at odds, but it is definitely it's very much a partnership because it is really all about nailing your structure, both at a template and a page level and a site level, but also like the broader question of like, who are we as a business and what do we want to be known for? And like, what is our angle and how do we communicate that with consistency and regularity and covering the topics that actually mean things to us?
Yeah, definitely. And I think when we've been thinking about AI overviews, we're thinking about the tracking of it. I had a conversation with Tomek from ZipTie Dev talking about how to track AI overviews and what the process they're going through to actually understand the layout and how it shifts from query to query and all that kind of stuff. And that's also relevant on your page as well. Like how much of the actual screen, whether that's, and don't forget mobile and desktop, how much of that screen is actually giving the user what they expected from that click, from the SERP or from the internal link or from the backlink or whatever it is your header image 1920 by 1080 and taking up the entire screen. So when they click on something, they just get a massive image and then no answer, no context, no information. That's not a good idea. That's not good user experience. I know a lot of people have been talking about that importance of above the fold information, right? You talked earlier about the fact that we have a big bold heading. Like, it sounds like a bit of a joke, but Google has explicitly said if you don't clearly label your H1s, we're probably going to guess that the biggest, boldest, most prevalent title, the bit of text on that page, is going to be your H1. So we'll treat it like that, whether you like it or not. Think about how you're laying things out, folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think that above the fold stuff, again, coming around to the product listing pages, that's really important to actually get people to the products before waffling on about stuff. And when it comes to the SERPs, you're going to see that AI overview at the top there. Hey, Google, follow your own best practices, follow your own guidelines. Sometimes people don't want to see that stuff at the top there. Maybe they want to get to the links and the content. Just saying.
Maybe.
One last thing I kind of wanted to ask you. I know there was a conversation I had with Eric Hoover a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about kind of new content structures. Have you heard of the ranch style of SEO structure versus skyscraper style of SEO structure?
So to give you a bit of context about that, Sai, I wrote an article back in 2012 telling people that we needed to stop using childish language in SEO. Look, if I'm understanding the concept of it, it is more kind of the related topic concept than the like super kind of niche topic concept. And I mean, like that lines up pretty neatly with entities and semantic search. It makes sense. Like I said, if I look for a travel review about Paris and they don't talk about the Louvre or Notre Dame or, you know, the great bakeries and whatever, like I'm not going to necessarily believe that they actually know their shit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm, not to do a pun of, I'm on the fence of ranch because I barely even know what a ranch is. I'm a British guy. I've never been to America. But even that kind of, like you said, the language we're using here, again, feels very US-centric. Welcome to SEO. But it's that kind of element of, is there that much of a difference? How many people are actually following that super, super strict skyscraper style pillar page type thing? Whereas we've just been talking about having a broader understanding of a topic and approaching things not from a keyword perspective, but from a topic perspective, from an entity-led point of view, including all of that structured data. Does it need a name like a ranch? Like I said, I feel like most people don't know what a ranch actually is. I've seen it in Westerns, I guess. Like, a cowboy is still a thing? Is that a thing that's still happening in 2020? I don't know. I don't know how the US works.
No, I couldn't tell you. I haven't lived there for 11 years.
Damn, we're both out of practice. But yeah, I think that leaning towards that topic-focused, the entity-led approach, I think is going to be a way for us to kind of future-proof our content, right? When you're going in and approaching it, think about the consolidation and then think about how to create that new content. Think about the hierarchical stuff we were talking about half an hour ago and thinking about all the things that it's going to help us continue to rank, continue to get clicks, continue to drive revenue and all that kind of stuff. Like you said, Amanda, at the end of the day, it always comes down to money, right? So this is the kind of stuff that is going to convert better and work better for you and your users.
And I mean, to take it even a step back from topic and entity, right? It is business-led and market-led content and consumer-led 100%. Content. It's business strategy pulling into what we publish on the website.
100%. Yeah, you're totally right. I think a lot of people, and I've totally been guilty of this in my career. I always hold my hands up on this podcast if I've been guilty of stuff in the past, of like getting so focused in our little SEO bubble and not thinking about the broader goals of the business or the client or the company you're working in or whatever it is, when actually you're trying to tell a CEO who doesn't give a shit about impressions, like, then you need to explain what impressions are and go through this whole process. Like, think about what actually matters to people and why we're doing what we're doing. What's the end goal at the end of this? And the same is true for many businesses as it is for Google. We're here to make money. We're here to hopefully provide helpful and useful content for users, right? That's hopefully the goal at the end of the day.
Such a high point to end the conversation.
I know, right? I know. I tried to be like, yeah. I was like, kind of, maybe, hopefully. Fingers crossed. As the world crumbles around us and natural disasters and all the politics that are happening and all that fun stuff.
No, it's good. It's good. You have to keep, like, that's one thing I think being a more conservative SEO is you have to have a positive outlook, right? Because there's no other way to take it when you're like, I'm looking like 5 to 10 years in the future of this business and what will make sense for you when you start investing in video now. Like, you have to be kind of positive, even if you don't want to be.
Exactly. Well, let's end on a positive. How can the lovely folks watching and listening follow you, Amanda? Follow Engage on Enterprise SEO and all the good stuff you're doing at Flock.
LinkedIn is my most consistent channel at the moment. I do have a Twitter profile. I don't think I posted on it in like 3 years, probably since I reached out to you. I am also relatively inconsistent on Twitter, but yes, so I would say LinkedIn.
Nice.
You could look me up by my name, so Amanda King, or you could look me up by Flock.
Nice. I think that's been, again, a kind of theme for this year, is everybody's moving away from Twitter. A lot of people are like, I used to be part of SEO Twitter, now I just go to my LinkedIn. It's very much, if you're not already on LinkedIn and you want to be part of the SEO conversation, I feel like you kind of need to be on LinkedIn now.
I think so.
And not to put you on the spot, do we know when we're getting new episodes of Engage on Enterprise SEO?
Oh,
I regret answering that question.
No. I will do my best to have something out before the end of November, and I want to get the rest of the season out by the end of the year. So I've got Perna, Morty, Nick Ranger, and a couple other folks that I'm chatting to. So.
Amazing. That's already a very good lineup already. So, like I said, if you haven't already checked out the first season, I highly recommend it. I'll put a link for everything in the show notes if you want to go and follow Amanda, follow Flock, listen to the podcast, all that good stuff. We'll even put links and resources to some articles and stuff like that as well. So, listeners, viewers, please do go and check out the awesome work Amanda, Flock, and the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for finally giving me a prod and a poke and making it happen. It's been a really, really fun conversation.
Amazing.
And that wraps up this week's episode of Search with Candour. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Amanda as much as I did. I know there was a lot to talk about. We could have done a whole other podcast all about extra content and content consolidation and all kinds of stuff, but I hope you very much enjoyed the conversation that we had. Of course, I'll be back next week with more fantastic guests. I've got Will Slater coming up on the show talking all about how writing and storytelling specifically can improve your content writing and your copywriting, and I'll be talking to Tomek Rudzki all about AI overviews and everything they're doing at ZipTie Dev as well. I've also got, like I said, I think I said this last week, in fact, an amazing roundtable discussion, hopefully in person as well, which should be recording very, very soon, between me, Mark, Arnaut Hillmans, Begum Kaya, and Yama Shimshek as well. It's going to be a massive, huge, similar to what we did for the episode 100, but hopefully we're doing it in person here in the Candour studios. So that's the plan for essentially our big 2024 wrap-up with the 2025 predictions as well. I think one time in between then, Mark and I will also have a nice catch-up and talk about what's been going on and all of the chaos that has been happening with the site reputation abuse stuff that's been happening, all of the core updates that are happening as well. If you haven't already checked out, I did publish a mini bonus episode on Friday. So if you're watching or listening to this on Monday, it's available on Spotify, all the podcast places, and YouTube on Friday. If you want to go and check out me talking to Steve Payne from Systrix all about the data behind the site reputation abuse stuff, all of the core update stuff that has been happening over the last few days. It is about 13-14 minutes long, something like that, and it is a really interesting quick chat and quick catch up with Steve about all the data they're seeing over there at Systrix. So if you want to kind of keep up to date with all of the chaos on the SERPs at the moment, that is a good little way to catch up with all of the latest information and latest data. Of course, like I said, we've got some amazing episodes and guests throughout the rest of the year and into 2025. I'm already planning 2025 guests. I've got 2 bookings for 2025, and that feels so bizarre to me already. But like I said, have a lovely week. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. If you're also watching, please like, subscribe, share the podcast if you think it will be useful to you, your colleagues, your friends, even your family, maybe even your clients as well. And I will see you next week. Thank you and have a lovely week.